In 2019, Steven Soderbergh made not one, but two movies for Netflix. The first one, High Flying Bird, came out in February and was the subject of last week's episode. Now it's time to set our watches ahead to October and the release of The Laundromat.
Well, actually, I don't want to be the but actually guy, but actually, I think you mean September, Keir, because this one didn't go straight to streaming. It premiered at the Venice Film Festival, then went to the Toronto International Film Festival, then went to San Sebastian Film Festival. And I believe it had a theatrical release, a small theatrical release. So Soderbergh, given his run of recent streaming releases, is kind of breaking new ground. Is, what's old is new again or something. I don't know.
Is Netflix going Soderbergh or is Soderbergh going Netflix? We'll get to the bottom of it in this episode of the Filmographers podcast, where we study a director's entire career, one film at a time. I'm Keir Graff.
And I'm Michael Moreci. In our first season, we're turning the spotlight on Steven Soderbergh, one of Hollywood's most versatile and fascinating directors. Episode by episode, we discuss why each of his films succeeded or failed, always looking at them in the context of the Hollywood landscape at the time they were released.
This is the 30th full-length film we've covered so far, but don't worry, there's plenty of Soderbergh to come. Mike, please kick us off with your one-sentence summary of The Laundromat.
When a mild wave capsizes a boat and tragically kills a woman's husband and her insurance claim is denied because the policy was sold to a shell company, there's no measure she won't take to uncover a wild and true money laundering scandal.
First, you must ask yourself, are you wealthy?
Simple truth of the world is that most games, for someone to win, well, someone has to lose.
Think of this as fairy tale that actually happened.
There's confusion over who has to pay.
So they drowned Joe and 20 other innocent people, and somebody's making money from it.
It all goes back to this law firm, Mossack Fonseca.
So what happens next? What do we do next?
All I did was try and send money.
It's a scam that goes from Houston to the West Indies to some bank who knows where.
They're getting away with murder.
Which is bad.
Bad? Yeah, bad is such a big word for being such a small word.
I'm gonna get your back. Gonna go out on the town. Get your back. How does it all work?
Bribery, corruption, money laundering, millions and millions and millions of dollars. Somebody has to sound the alarm.
Let's.
Where the fuck is my money?
Most of the time, we don't even know.
What did you know about the Panama Papers before watching this film?
Not much. I guess I assumed they were like unpublished David Lee Roth lyrics that Sammy Hagar, during his campaign to become Van Halen's new lead singer, leaked out to the public.
That sounds plausible. Now, I remember following the news about the Panama Papers, but 6 months later, I think all I could have come up with if you had asked me was something like, rich people were hiding money and they got caught.
Sometimes all you need is a headline.
Or a movie that will explain a complex story in a way we can all understand while we're eating our popcorn.
Or that, although, I'm going to be honest, having watched this movie twice now, I'm still not sure I totally understand it, which is probably why I keep my money like tucked beneath my mattress.
You're a true South Sider, Mike.
That's true. I don't trust anyone. Screw those banks.
We'll definitely get into the ins and outs of how the Laundromat presented this scandal and maybe even introduce you to my financial advice. But first, some quick background. In 2016, someone calling himself John Doe leaked a massive amount of information, 11.5 million documents amounting to 2.6 terabytes of data to a German newspaper. These documents came from Mossack Fonseca, a Panamanian law firm that provided corporate services relating primarily to shell corporations registered in tax havens like, let's just say Nevis, a small island in the Caribbean.
Shell corporations being companies that exist primarily on paper so people can avoid paying taxes in the countries where they actually extract resources, do business, and employ people.
Exactly. And the sad part of it is that tax havens, and some U.S. states are the most permissive tax havens of all, are largely legal. Avoiding taxes on large sums of money is unfair and hurts local economies, but it can be legal. And although the Panama Papers leaker appears to have been largely motivated by exposing income inequality, the leaks did help reporters discover that many of these shell corporations were being used illegally. For example, to launder money, evade taxes, commit fraud, and skirt international sanctions. World leaders were also implicated in shady doings, most notably the prime ministers of England and Iceland, and hundreds of public figures, celebrities, and high net worth individuals were exposed. For many of them, it was nothing more than an embarrassing episode. The Panama Papers and the reporting from over 100 media outlets that helped make sense of them turned a bright spotlight on the ways rich people get richer while hiding their money.
Hearing you say that, it's just, man, vast and crazy that like it's so big and so many different people that were involved at so many different levels and so many, and it's not just one shady thing that's happening. There's just like these like a shell companies that's like these Russian nesting dolls. There's all these reasons for, fraud, taxes, just hiding illegally gained money. Like there's just so many ways and reasons these monies are getting in. It's the scope of it is crazy. But thankfully, I'm certain Keir, everyone involved was punished accordingly. Right? It had to be.
Well, it's complicated. Many did face legal consequences. Some people were arrested and countries did recover some of the tax money owed to them. Mossack Fonseca was shut down and its founders, Jürgen Mossack and Ramon Fonseca, were briefly jailed and then put on trial. But Panama, perhaps embarrassed by the fact that the whole scandal was named after them, seemed eager to move on. After a long trial, all Mossack Fonseca employees were acquitted in June of this year. So very contemporary story. And remember, they were only one of many firms helping many entities, still secret, hide their money in many other offshore entities.
The only person who can make sense of this and cut through the noise, this is a job for our man, for Steven Soderbergh. Get me extension 765.
In the video for that song, Mike, David Lee Roth is being led away in handcuffs. Van Halen predicted this whole thing.
The lyrics in that song, there is a bit, it says model citizen, zero discipline. So, which is now a whole new context. That's going to haunt me now. I love Panama. I love Van Halen. I unironically really enjoy Van Halen.
I unironically also enjoy Van Halen, but I'm not a Van Hagar guy.
No.
Diamond Dave.
Diamond Dave all the way. Oh, easy. Yeah. No, Sammy was too serious. I mean, he's fun now, but he was too serious at the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
David Lee Roth would never sing right now.
Another entity caught up in the Panama Papers, the estate of Stanley Kubrick. Most of his wealth was tied up in his home in England, called Childwickbury Manor. And as an American expat in England, when he died, the place would probably have been sold to cover his tax debt to the English government, if not for the holding companies and trusts administered by Mossack Fonseca that allow his family to still live there. How do we feel about that, Mike?
Meh.
Where's the outrage? Where's the outrage?
I mean, I guess I should feel outraged about it. Look, here's the thing. We all know that Kubrick, we all know him as like the authoritarian, controlling, perfectionist director. But somebody like you, I'm sure you know this as well, who have like maybe not studied Kubrick, but have been around film enough to know that in addition to being a controlling authoritarian director, he was also a ruthlessly pragmatic guy. So him protecting his money and his estate and family just through sheer satanic calculus, like having no morals or no sentiment attached, makes a lot of sense to me, actually.
Fair.
plus, one of his daughters is buried on the estate ground. So probably just, I don't know, it's probably just best just to let the Kubricks remain. Remains.
Yes, I got you there. Yeah, you don't want to remove remains. That's like the whole, then you've got poltergeist scenario possibly for the next tenants of Chilbrickbury Manor. Interestingly, Pedro Almodovar, Jackie Chan, and Emma Watson were also named, but it's hard for me to think of them as the bad guys here.
Yeah, I was gonna say, not Jackie Chan, because I love Jackie Chan, even though he's kind of got some dicey skeletons going on in his life. But Emma Watson, she's always, the person, like such a driven person, driven by causes and doing good in the world. And here she is, hiding her money. So
maybe Jackie Chan somewhat expected. Emma Watson, not Emma Watson.
Yeah. Not the guy from Police Story 3.
Like on Police Story 3 rules. I do have a harder time getting upset about creatives, and maybe it's just a double standard on my part, but in some ways I just feel like it's nice that a director like Almodovar has enough money that he has to hide it, right? Like all artists should be so lucky. Usually the artists are not the ones that end up with the pile of cash. Anyway, it's easy to see why Soderbergh was attracted to this project. He's not one of those celebs who goes around making self-important speeches, drawing attention to his politics, or making videos of himself singing Imagine in his mansion, but he is obviously on the side of the little guy. A movie about the Panama Papers fits squarely in the tradition of Aaron Brockovich, Traffic, and The Informant.
Yeah, and even in their own way, fits in with Out of Sight and Magic Mike and High Flying Bird. Like Soderbergh, we've cataloged this and talked about this, but he has blue collar roots, and he's never really forgotten them, and he displays them in so many ways in his work ethic and the subject matters he tackles and the way his love for underdogs, etc. And like you said, he is firmly on the side, this important point of the little guy. He loves outsiders, and I don't know what he enjoys more, is like seeing his underdogs like an Aaron Brockovich, Jack Foley, whoever, seeing them succeed, or making sure that the evil corporations and other high-powered figures get their comeuppance.
Why not both, Mike? Why not both?
Why not? Why not?
Yeah, and because along those lines, even Logan Lucky fits, right? And I'll draw the line at Ocean's 11 because it's hard to see Danny and Rusty as class warriors, but
prequel.
Oh, yeah, when they rob the factory in their dying Rust Belt town.
That's actually not bad. Hold on, let me get my notebook.
Let's workshop that. Now, I'm just going to skim the production backstory on this one because the big question I want to, because I have a big question I want to ask you after we both give our reviews, and I think sometimes I've been going a little deep on backstory in some of the movies we've been talking about lately.
I love it.
Yes. So hopefully we'll see. I might be making a promise I can't deliver. Now, the Panama Papers leaks began in April 2016. That same month, United Talent Agency started shopping the rights to Secrecy World, a book about the leaks by Pulitzer winner Jake Bernstein that wouldn't come out until November 2017. And for people who don't know, the publishing industry, like, how is this possible? How are you selling a book that doesn't exist? This happens fairly often, particularly if you have, not generally with novels, but generally with nonfiction. If you've got a writer who's an expert on a subject, there's a big breaking news thing. Maybe they've already done a lot of reporting on it, and they've got a track record of publication. They can deliver a book. They're a journalist, so they can deliver it quickly. People will whip up a book proposal in a week and shop it, and at any rate, presto changeo. So the idea is that the book is going to come out 18 months, give or take, after the leaks, which is In publishing, we call that crashing a book. That's pretty short turnaround to write and publish a book, but it's certainly doable. So Gray Matter Productions bought the screen rights, and in July 2016, 3 months after the leaks, it was announced that Soderbergh would come on as one of the producers and possibly direct. It wasn't given because he sometimes produces movies other people direct, and that Scott Z. Burns would be writing the script.
Right, and Burns, of course, we friend of the show. He also wrote Contagion, The Informant, and Side Effects. I actually had a question for you. Now I think about it, you might not remember. Was The Informant also, that was a book? Was that sold before as well? Do you remember?
Oh, that's a good question. It was definitely a book.
I don't know. Part of me thinks we talked about that, but I don't know. We might not have. But I do remember it being a book at the very least. I'm right on that count, right?
Yes, it was a book by Kurt Eichenwald.
Oh, that's right. Now I don't think it was. I think it was published and then made. I'm pretty sure. Yes, I remember the Eichenwald thing. Because remember them. Yes, because they were like using the book as reference, and the book was massive, and they like kind of had to chop it up.
The book was published in 2000 and The Informant came out in 2009. So definitely a different timeline, but similar in that, a big expose nonfiction book was the source material.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, cool. Thanks.
Soderbergh was still filming Logan Lucky at the time, but we know he likes to fill out his dance card long in advance. In April 2018, with Logan Lucky, Unsane, and the TV show Mosaic all recently released, and High Flying Bird in the can, but not released, Soderbergh was finally announced as the director of the still untitled movie about the Panama Papers starting in fall. But at least the book had been published. In May, Meryl Streep was announced as the star, and the cast started to come together with Gary Oldman and Antonio Banderas as Mossack and Fonseca. Before it was all over, the cast would include James Cromwell, Robert Patrick, David Schwimmer, Jeffrey Wright, Sharon Stone, Matthias Schoenaerts, Melissa Rauch, and even Will Forte, Chris Parnell, and Larry Wilmore.
Yeah, they had great roles, Forte and Parnell. But yeah, you add it all together, and it's a regular Ocean's 13, right? Ocean's 13, I think we have there.
Soderbergh's 13.
Soderbergh's 13, yes.
Yeah, Soderbergh is becoming like Woody Allen used to be, where every director wants to work with him at least once in their career. And in every other way, not like Woody Allen.
Thank God.
In a July interview with Filmmaker magazine promoting the Criterion release of Sex, Lies, and Videotape, Soderbergh said the film would probably go to Netflix. And indeed, in October, it was announced that Netflix would finance and release the movie. Shooting started on October 15th and continued for nearly 2 months, with filming locations in Miami, Key West, and various parts of California, Nevada, and a green screen, which came in handy for the showy oneer that opens the movie.
You don't give yourself enough credit. Succinct, to the point. Got the information out there. Good job. I'm impressed. Well done.
Why, thank you, Mike.
Yeah, it's that kind of thoughtful attention to detail that is the hallmark of the Filmographers podcast.
Oh, wait. Are we going to commercial now?
No, not a commercial, just a helpful announcement that it's now easier than ever to show your support for the Filmographers podcast. Yes, as always, you can take a quick moment to subscribe, like, or rate the show on your preferred platform. But now you can give us a review in seconds.
Does this involve AI? As a working writer, I cannot condone the use of AI for any creative endeavor.
It does not. No, not at all. So listeners, simply go to our show notes where you'll find some sample reviews. Pick your favorite, copy it, and paste it into the review of the Filmographers podcast. Kidding, sort of. What you can do is just customize it how you want, but you sure don't have to. Just remember that reviews and other engagement are essential to us helping find other people who like what we're doing and expand our audience. So just a little snippet, a little review, a little rating. It's truly, truly remarkably helpful.
Pre-written reviews. What a great idea. I wish I'd thought of that.
You took the words right out of my mouth, Keir.
Well, Scott and I very early on decided that humor was the best vehicle to get some of these ideas across. And when Scott suggested that we take a sort of kaleidoscopic approach and globe hop to follow these stories, I felt we had the opportunity to keep the viewer engaged and entertained. I knew it was going to move quickly. I knew it would have a very poppy feel to it. And in fact, in multiple stages in the movie, the characters themselves, mostly Gary and Antonio, make jokes about how complicated all of these transactions are, and basically make the audience feel okay with being completely confused by what's going on. But it was challenging because there are so many stories to choose from. I was telling Meryl today, Jake Bernstein made a document in which he took 30 countries and outlined stories from those countries that we might be interested in, and we picked from that list. But you could make this movie every year for 15 years and never run out of stories.
Mike, what did you think of The Laundromat? Did you like the way Soderbergh chose to dramatize the story and convey all that complicated information?
Well, it's hard to say. Like, information of this scope it's just really hard to convey, and it's really hard to digest from a viewer standpoint, but what makes it easier, what makes it better, all this big ideas and this massive story, like you said, like we talk about, like in your background of it, like how big it was and how vast it was and how multifaceted it was. Getting that stuff to narrow, like squeezing that watermelon through a picket fence, like you just need to find the right picket. And the picket is like, is the narrative, is the story that you're telling around it. And I don't know that The Laundromat had a great story, at least a story that I loved. I mean, I'm going to backtrack a little bit. Like, the narrative to me, the way that The Laundromat is crafted, in my opinion, is inherently flawed. Because in order to make all this stuff work, because I think this is bigger than, say, The Informant. The Informant had like one guy who was doing all this crazy shit. You look at Mark Whitaker and you're like, oh my God, he did this and he did that. But it's all singularly focused on him, where The Laundromat had so many different players. I mean, when you're talking about the Panama Papers, this didn't even scratch the surface, realistically. But like, it still had in the movie, like we said, the Ocean's 13, there's so many. I mean, granted, Will Forte and Chris Parnell like showed up for like 30 seconds, just to get buried in the desert. And it was a great, funny
Best
scene.
part of the movie.
That's part of the movie. Yeah, it was hilarious. I love Will Forte especially, but like, there's so many. It's still a very big movie, where you have to. There's just so many rotating POVs and so many different things happening. Like, ostensibly, Meryl Streep is a star, but there's a lot of other stuff going on. So, in order to make all this stuff work, to convey this really complicated game of shell companies and offshore accounts and all this kind of stuff, you just have to come out and say what it is. Like, that's really the only way to make, I think, the story, make any of it work. And they do that with Oldman and Banderas, who just come out and say what exactly is going on in those interstitials. And to me, I'll be honest, that was the best part of the movie.
They're the real best part of the movie. Yeah,
they are the real best part of the movie. They're so much fun. I mean, granted, they're just info dumping. They're doing it in a creative way and a clever way, but they're just literally, Shodo tells out the window. They're just telling you. And I think that's a necessity of this story, is you need this kind of Greek chorus, this present narrator who's just telling you all the events that's going on between the events, and making sense of it. But now with them coming out and telling, now that we know, and maybe this is just a luxury of time, like, we all kind of know the idea of shell companies and the wealthy hiding their money in offshore accounts. Like, I know the Panama Papers was a huge thing because it was so vast, because the whistle was blown. It gave specificity to this idea that we already know. It's like, oh yeah, the wealthy just put their money in accounts in Sweden and Panama and blah, 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 all these other places. And they're constantly hiding their cash and avoiding taxes and things like that. We all kind of knew that, but like, it feels like it sucks the wind out of Meryl Streep's investigation, which is the heart of the narrative, is like her trying to find out why she's not getting any settlement from the boating company that her husband died on. You kind of just know, we know where Meryl Streep's character is ultimately headed. Like,
if I can jump in, that's such a great point. Like, the definition of like a mystery, say in fiction, is something where something happened and you don't know how it happened or who did it, and so the story is a quest to discover that. A thriller is typically like, something bad will happen if steps aren't taken to prevent that, and we don't really have either of those here, right?
Right.
The thing has already happened, and we're being told from the start what has happened and who did it, more or less. So it does suck a lot of the drama right out of the story.
Yeah. It's, I think, good reference, thing to frame that is Hitchcock's suspense versus horror. Like, suspense is, there's a bomb under the table, it blows up and it, kills two people. Like, horror is you don't know that there's a bomb under the table and something just explodes and kills two people. Suspense is that the bomb's under the table and you just don't know when or if it'll explode. It's a suspense versus horror. Is that what it is?
I think he says like terror.
Terror. Yeah, I don't think he says horror.
But
something like that.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Yeah, but it's about like knowing or not knowing, and how, and this doesn't really have either, and I don't think it's necessarily trying to be, but it's about narrative drive, really, because like you said, I think you said it better than me. It's like, it just comes out and says it. So now we know. So what is Meryl Streep's ultimate journey? Like Mark Whitacre, for example, this is such a, The Informant is such a perfect movie to contrast this against, because it's, very similar in tone, very similar style, same writer, same director. There's so many similarities and overlap. Like, you don't know until the end just how like bonkers Mark Whitacre is. like you're on first viewing, you're like, you don't know that he's made up these people. You're not really sure. He says so many different things. What's true? You still don't really know at the end, like what's true and what's not, because he weaves this web of lies and nonsense that just pile and pile and pile. And that's kind of the point. But like, you don't, until like the rug really gets pulled out at the end, like you don't know the depths of Mark Whitacre's like game he's playing, and he doesn't even really know the game he's playing, I don't think. But like in here, like, the game, it's being played. They're always explaining it one step ahead of the game itself, like, so when Meryl Streep goes to, I forget the island's called, to see Jeffrey Wright,
Nevis.
We already know who Jeffrey, the movie's already shown Jeffrey Wright and shows that he just sits in an office and signs stuff and doesn't do anything. And he's this shell thing. So by the time you get to that point and she bumps into him and then he goes, leaves the country and flees, like, you already know what he's done and what.
And there's a great reveal about his character, but it doesn't have anything to do with her storyline.
Oh, that he has a second family.
That he has a second family. And it's funny, but it's funny. Like, and she witnesses that, but it has nothing to do with her character.
No, nothing. No. And there's a lot of stuff like that that is totally removed from her character. The lens, it like zooms in and zooms out and then zooms further out and goes in. It's just like, it's kind of all over the place.
Is this Soderbergh's Altman movie? It's a little bit of an Altman movie.
It's funny because we'll talk about that a little bit next week too, because he goes like a very improvisational route with Let Them All Talk. So it feels like maybe he is having a little Altman stage of his career. But look, it's a kind of fun movie, like any Soderbergh movie like this. Like, it's light on its feet. Movie we've already met, Informant, Logan Lucky, stuff like that. We've already mentioned these type of movie. It's light on its feet, but the narrative lacks a kind of sting, and more importantly, it lacks I'll be honest, and this is I don't know how people will kind of roll with this, or how you will, Keir, but like, it lacks a strong, compelling, and likable central character. Like,
I'm sorry for Mike's hot takes.
We got to have some sort of like announcement at the beginning, like with hot that kind takes. Of like flames, explosions. Yeah. Look, it takes me a lot to invest in Meryl Streep. I'm not the biggest Meryl Streep fan, and her performance here is just so grating. Like, so nails on a chalkboard. Like she plays Ellen, a simple old salt of the earth who gets screwed by, unfathomable powers she plays it with such simpleness that it's just kind of insulting. Like, I think she wants to think that she understands your good old average Joe, but she makes Ellen so average and so daft, and it just comes off as caricature. Her constant like, golly gee, I just don't, what's going on here? Like, it's just like, oh, stop. Like, it's like, you look at how Damon played Mark Whitaker, or how Julia Roberts was Aaron Brockovich. They like breathed life into these roles, and they made them big yet still feel authentic. All Streep does in this portrayal of this like salt of the earth type person, this like average working whoever, is absolutely patronize the type of person she's playing, and it annoyed me cover to cover, end to end. And since we're here, let's just go. Let's go.
Where are we going now, Mike? Hot takes.
Round 2, the sequeler. Since we are here, what makes matters worse, what really exposes Streep for, I think, who she really is a moment that is the absolute worst moment of all Soderbergh's movies, and that is not hyperbole. It's not.
It's the ending, isn't it?
It sure as hell is. Like, Meryl Streep literally preaching at viewers. I don't even know where to begin. It is insufferable to me. It's all the things that irk my dislike for Streep, all just rolled into an intolerable and completely unnecessary scene. I will never understand why Soderbergh even agreed to film it, much less as the editor of the movie kept it in. I can only hope that this is contractually a contractual obligation. Like, he had to do this. This Meryl Streep's, she's like, I'm gonna come out and I'm gonna tell the plebs, how they're getting screwed. I don't know if that's the case, but God, I hope so, because it's the biggest stumble, fumble, bumble in all of Soderbergh's filmography. I don't believe it exists. So, Keir, what about you? How did you like the movie? We don't have to talk about the ending in particular. We could. I'm happy to go on. But
I think you covered it.
I've never really been gone full negative on this podcast. Neither one of us has. We've been very respectful and mindful, and I feel like I threw our integrity out the window in the last 2 minutes, Keir.
We're the film nice guys, and you've just destroyed our image as the film nice guys with your hot take.
I ruined it.
Well, that ending made me stream like tears of happiness that I wiped away with my NPR tote. No, I'm just kidding. I didn't hate it or her as much as you did, but I agree. It's funny. Like, I think you make really excellent points about the broadness of her performance in general. I do think she's obviously a very talented actor. She does show excellent range. I like her a lot more in the film we're going to discuss next week, Let Them All Talk. I think she's perfect in that, pitch perfect. Here, I agree. Like, she's leaning into the dumb hats and the Leighton t-shirts. And again, it's hard to say which choices are, it's an improv. Soderbergh welcomes input and improvisation from a lot of people. So it's really hard to know. And this is something we could go down a rabbit hole on, is like, I think typically the blame has to lie at the director's feet. So if that scene is in the movie, we can't blame Streep for it. I think we got to blame Soderbergh. Yeah. Now you're clutching your NPR tote. Yeah, I think we've got to lay the blame on his feet. We were
get this on fresh air.
Yeah, I think that like in interviews he was giving around the time of this movie to promote the movie, he was leaning hard into the politics. I think he got caught up in the moment and his outrage, and I get it. Like, I share his outrage. This is appalling. I think income inequality is the number one issue that we have to confront in this country and on this planet today. I mean, it's the reason so many people live in poverty and hunger, and it's the reason like our roads are falling apart. And it's just, people are like offshoring their wealth, and they're not participating in the economies of the country that they, where they make their money. It's a huge thing. And I think that he was so, again, I can't really speak for him, but I think that he was so outraged by this that he kind of let his political instincts for once get ahead of his dramatic instincts. And I agree, the ending wasn't what the movie deserved. But let me back up from the ending. I didn't love the movie, but it grew on me somewhat. It's clearly not nearly as successful as Aaron Brockovich or The Informant. And I love the way you talked about Roberts and Damon's portrayals of their characters, because that is a key distinction. Those are also somewhat broad portrayals because there's some comedy in them, but they're also infused with humanity and warmth and care and likability, and you really believe in these people. And we don't believe in Streep's character here. It's a type, not a richly imagined character. And maybe the movie didn't really allow that. I don't know. At any rate, it's not as successful as those movies, but as you've said, it's such a big story to dramatize. It took 100 journalists, more than 100, to just make sense of these leaks and try to create the stories that the governments and law enforcement then acted on. Basically, there was so much to sift through. So that's a hell of a tough story to tell. And I really appreciate Burns and Soderbergh for taking a swing at it. I love Gary Oldman in anything. I got a kick out of him as and Banderas as Mossack and Fonseca. In reading about the film, I was surprised that their characters seemed to annoy a lot of people. People seem to almost be mad at them or feel like they ruined the movie with their smug smarminess. But I mean, I think that was the whole point. I do think it was kind of a clever filmmaking choice to try to turn it inside out and have the narrators be the bad guys who are justifying themselves. It was certainly more creative than just we're on the outside and we're outraged at these jerks. Maybe it didn't fully work, but it was not the expected choice. The attempts to show cause and effect by tracing a tour boat's sinking, even if the least convincing sinking of a boat I've ever seen, again, probably intentional. But from that to the shady, reinsurers who won't pay the damages, it's also a good idea, at least on paper, if anybody writes on paper anymore. The other stories, about a womanizing African billionaire who bribes his daughter with bearer shares, and a British man poisoned after he blackmails the wife of a Chinese politician. Those are interesting, but they also didn't feel as directly connected to the movie. So maybe we could take some issue with the storytelling choices. They had to choose some stories, and those were interesting on their own, but it didn't feel like it cohered into a great driving narrative. And again, Brockovich and The Informant, you have one person driving the action, and maybe they should have just taken more liberties and given us that singular story to make a more effective movie. Maybe.
I think that's not a bad idea. Yeah, that's a great point. I think that's part of hurt it. Like those stories that you mentioned, I didn't even mention, they're so forgettable. I forgot. I just watched the movie this weekend. I'm like, oh yeah, that stuff happened.
Oh right, yeah.
It's just like, what is the connective tissue is just so loose, very loose connective tissue between what Oldman and Banderas are saying, and then you have Streep stories, and you have these little side avenues, and it's just kind of like, feels like, I think you're right. Sorry to interrupt you, but I think it's like the Soderbergh just didn't know where to place the outrage. He's just constantly you see what, it's just like, okay, I get, yeah.
Well, and the one about the African billionaire and his family too, I enjoyed that as a vignette, as a little vignette. I thought it was funny and sad and interesting, and the actors all did a great job. And I loved Larry Wilmore when he shows up as this sleazy lawyer. Larry Wilmore, but the whole point connecting it to Mossack and Fonseca seemed to be that, the billionaire bribes his daughter with these bearer shares, which he then removes the value from. So when she shows up, they're worthless. And it was this kind of 20-minute journey to get to this point of oh yeah, but you can get screwed by these things too. And it just didn't feel and I didn't feel particularly outraged on the behalf of any of these people, because they're living the life of Riley, and they're rich people who got scammed. I'm much more wanting to sympathize with the little people who get scammed.
Yeah, 100%. That's a great point. Yes. Yeah, I agree with you.
So, I always like to talk about the cast a little bit. Like the cast is pretty good. I like you. I'm not the world's biggest Meryl Streep fan. I don't hate her as much as you do. No more hot take territory for me on Meryl Streep. But she does show her range from this movie to the next one. But we've probably said enough about Streep. It's such a big ensemble. We don't really get to spend too much time with anyone other than Streep, Oldman, and Banderas. Some of the celebrity casting of bit parts feels a little unnecessary. Like, did we need David Schwimmer? I don't know. I did love the quick deaths of Will Forte and Chris Parnell. That was a funny grace note. I don't know. Overall, it was an interesting watch, quite funny at times. That was a little bit of a letdown in the end. Maybe it ultimately comes down to the sheer volume of information and characters. We keep coming back to Brockovich, but even though that was based around a single person, when you think about it, that was a complex case with a ton of litigants, right? And this storytelling choices turned it into a three-hander, which this one almost was. But Aaron Brockovich makes us want to jump up and cheer. And this one is just, I don't know, it's so much more cynical, rightly so. Maybe it's more of a grown-up movie. I liked it, but I didn't love it. And although I agree with the politics 100%, as I said, I think finally it's just too preachy with too much direct address, including the ending. And, I don't want to compare this to the much reviled Don't Look Up, which I didn't hate as much as some people, but is not good. But it does have a little bit of that stink on it, right? Soderbergh is at his, best when he's telling stories. And this one just feels like the story was too much in service of the message.
Let me ask you a quick question, because you got my wheels turning. Let me ask you a quick question. Like, do you see the distinction? And this is something that kind of, and we're starting to see it fade a little bit, in storytelling, in cinema, where, cinema, hell, novels, TV shows, comics, everything, where it's like, hey, as long as the message is good and we're telling people politically, culturally, socially what they want to hear, we've done our job. That's why I think, to me, like, I guess that's the question. Like, is that enough? Like, does that make a story? That to me, and I've said this a million times, is why I think Get Out is one of the best movies of this century, because it doesn't go around saying like, "Ooh, racism's bad, guys." Yeah. It shows you how racism is bad. Like, it makes this great story. That's one of the greatest Twilight Zone stories ever, which is saying a lot. And it puts it in a package that you walk away and you're like, oh boy, I get it. It never wags its finger at you. It never tells you how to feel, like how do you handle that though? Like, how do you handle that distinction between like having a movie or a story that's a message driven story, but also making it like, what obligation do you have to also have a good, compelling plot and narrative and characters, etc.?
Well, I think we just live in an era where, and it's a generational thing. I think people are so much more concerned now about displaying that they have the correct take on something and that their politics are right. And that hurts drama, because you think back to like the best movies have ambiguity and they have flawed characters. And sometimes, you didn't necessarily know the director's politics by watching the movie, because they're just making a movie about humans who are inherently messed up. And movies that make you want to watch them multiple times because you're trying to figure it out, or you're trying to puzzle through some great big issues. We now, I blame social media. I blame polarization. There's this fear, it's like people, we live in an era where some people don't even want people to make movies or tell stories about bad people, because, they feel like they're supporting bad people by telling stories about them or something, which is just insane to me. It's like, storytelling is how we explore things and how we make sense of the world. And, if we learn that bad people also have a shred of humanity, then we can figure out, well, why did they become bad? Where did that shred of humanity go? But I do think that filmmaking and storytelling and even novel writing has become much more simplistic. And I think that, even more so since 2020. And I get it. Like, a lot of people want to make sure that everybody understands, like, I'm one of the good guys, whatever they think that might be. But I do think it hurts art.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And you put it all into really a really great summary and a really great opinion. And I feel like that's what hurt the Laundromat. I think that's the only time you really see, and like I said, I don't hate it. I still like enjoy it. It's so fun, but like, I think this is the only time you really see, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's the only time you see the balance of power of like politics and art. Like politics are winning in a Soderbergh movie. Like he's like, I really got to say these things and show these things, and it becomes more about that than it is about really just like telling the story.
I agree, and while I did enjoy the movie, reasonably well, I think it's one of the things that just means it's not going to be one of his lasting or well remembered movies.
Yeah, I agree.
That's why we brought it to you. Somebody has to sound the alarm.
We like to focus on stories that are closer to home. Where did you say this company is located again?
Panama.
Like the hat.
As mentioned earlier, The Laundromat debuted at the Venice Film Festival on September 1st, 2019, before playing at 2 more festivals. And according to Wikipedia, it was released theatrically on September 27th before being made available to Netflix on October 18th. Mike, as usual, I turn to you for more information about the release strategy.
Yeah, this is interesting because I looked for information about which theaters it showed up in and can only find a reference to select cinemas. Nebulous at best. Now, the big film awards, here's the thing. The big film awards won't consider movies that don't screen first in theaters. So films like The Laundromat, which might be considered for an awards contender, especially at that time. Like we said, this is very much a movie of its time. I think that the political outrage, the showing these things, exposing them, etc. That was very, very big. It's very much a movie of its time. So the idea of it being an awards contender, I think we'd look at it now and be like, oh, no way. But then possibly, especially with Soderbergh involved, like that. There's a lot in Streep. There's a lot of pedigree. So right place, right time sort of thing. So a theatrical release for this movie in terms of awards consideration would be important, essential. But the big theater chains, at least in 2019, wanted a 90-day window before the movie was released for home entertainment. So if Netflix wanted to show this one in theaters, they were likely renting or offering generous terms to indie cinemas like, the Landmark, something like that. Now, how many screens it played on, I don't really know. It's hard to say. Like, it's just very unclear. And because Netflix, and this is where you get into this kind of dark arts of Netflix in general, and this is still a point of contention that exists today. Theater chains are not really willing to book Netflix movies because they know they're just being used as awards fodder. So, like, if Netflix comes out and says, "Oh, we want to play this movie in your theater for," I think the window has shrunk. I don't think it's 90 days anymore to be considered for an Oscar or whatever. But basically, theaters are like, screw you, like, no, you're not going to just use us for this. The way, sorry, I'm going on a tangent now, but the way theaters operate is that they have long-term contracts with a movie, basically. The studio, distributor, the movie, and it's good and bad. It's oftentimes bad for movie theaters sometimes because if like Joker Folie à Deux comes out, for example.
I don't know why you would use that as an example.
Well, I'll explain. It takes. And a lot of theaters were kind of many theaters left holding the bag because like they still had to run this piece of shit for the next 2 more weeks, like where normally they would just swoop it out the back door and put literally anything in its place. They were left having to hold on to this thing. So it's a complicated relationship, but because they have these relationships, because they have these contracts and they have these stipulations, like we'll play it for a certain amount of time, whatever, exclusivity, we'll play on the IMAX screen, this screen, whatever. It gets very, very particular. They're beholden to especially in award season, like we're going to play Wicked for 5 weeks and the best screens and the whatever. So when Netflix comes around and be like, can you play our movie for like 6 days so we can get an Oscar? They're like, no, like we're playing Gladiator 2 and making money. And, we signed a more generous deal with, Sony or whomever, who are giving us a better, financial deal if we play it for X amount of time, whereas you come along, want to play it for a week and are giving us crappy terms as well. So they're not going to push something out for that. So it's interesting and complicated. But the point is, when you get into this Netflix, environment, it is this dark arts, because you don't know how many theaters it played at which. We don't know. They don't share their numbers, their streaming numbers. So we don't know how many people watched it. We don't know, how many people the theatrically bought tickets, how much money it made on that end. We don't know how many people watched it. I mean, they'll sometimes come out and say things in terms of like streaming, like, oh, it was viewed by 100 million people this weekend. It's like, okay, but did they watch for 15 seconds? Did they watch the whole thing? Like, what does 100 million views actually look like? So very nebulous on both ends, the theatrical release of this movie, and we know nothing about how it performed on streaming. No idea. Even when it lands in the top 10, it's like, well, how many people watched it? We have no idea what that even means.
With all this secrecy, I'm starting to suspect Netflix is a shell corporation who conducts their business through Mossack Fonseca.
I mean, you joke, Keir, but I don't know how a company stays in debt for that long and keeps going.
Maybe they're laundering money.
They gotta be doing something. Jesus. Anyway, other big films with similar release plan in 2019 were actually, this is a murders. Oh, this is great. Lineup that remember when Netflix actually made movies?
Yeah. And spent big on movies.
We used to be a country, Keir. But in 2019, in addition to The Laundromat, which, like we said, was a pedigree of Soderbergh, Streep, a lot of Scott C. Burns, a lot of great things going for it. So while it didn't I think it's the least of these movies I'm about to name, it still was a big deal that this was being made and happening, right? But in addition to The Laundromat, you had Marriage Story, which was huge. The Irishman, I mean, Scorsese, De Niro, Pacino, Pesci, and Dolomite Is My Name, which I think is absolutely terrific. If people haven't seen that, the Eddie Murphy movie, it is fantastic. But again, this was back when Netflix was still spending big on movies and actually taking movies seriously. So ultimately with The Laundromat, in terms of Netflix relationship to it, we know that there was a movie. It exists. We know it came out, and we know people saw it. That's about it.
Okay. So it's a pretty full picture.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it is very much like a shell company. You keep peeling back layers only to find, oh, we don't know this. We don't know this. We know very little. But what we do know is the response to the movie. So what was the response to The Laundromat like here?
Yeah, that's right. That's on the record. Critics and audiences agree. They didn't really like it. Although most of the critics did give Soderbergh and Burns credit for tackling a tough subject. Todd McCarthy of The Hollywood Reporter wrote, Soderbergh and Burns seemingly wanted to emphasize the sheer outrageousness of the scam and have a little fun with it in the bargain, but their satirical aim ultimately doesn't measure up to the sharpness of their ambitions. A.O. Scott of the New York Times called it a didactic comedy, an earnest lesson in political economy dressed up as a farce. In a 2-star review for RogerEbert.com, Brian Tallarico wrote, most of all, it's an issue of tone. The film comes off as patronizing, a feeling I've never had before watching Soderbergh. Of course, The Laundromat doesn't need to place the Ellen Martins of the world on a pedestal to make us feel compassion for them, but it would be nice if it felt like the movie actually liked her and us in the end. Which I thought was a really interesting comment. I mean, we talked a little bit about this earlier, and we've often talked about how Soderbergh doesn't look down on his characters. Mike, do you agree with Tallarico?
I have to take a guess.
I know. I was teeing you up.
No, but that's a great find. I wish I could have put it as eloquently as Brian did. And I like Brian a lot he's the head editor, lead editor, whatever you want to call it, of RogerEbert.com right now, which is a very, very big torch to be passed. And I think he does a really great job with it. He has a great staff of writers working for him. They really do a great job over there. But I do absolutely agree with him. Again, I don't want to flog a dead horse too long, because I do like, there are times when I like Meryl Streep. I don't want to seem like I don't like her. I don't like her later movies, although the next one we're going to talk about, I do like her a lot in that. I just don't think she knows how to play normal people. Like, to her, an average older woman is kind of a dithering dum-dum who wears big soled Skechers and, just acts like a kindly old grandma who perpetually, just took fresh cookies out of the oven, like you use the word perfectly, broad, it's so broad. And like Brian points out, and I think he's right, like, I don't get the sense that the movie really likes her. I think they're like we talked about in this, the virtue signaling of the movie, like, it's trying so hard to make her so perfect and put her up on this pedestal that, like, it really doesn't give you a sense of like an actual an actual person behind the performance. Mark Whitaker felt like a real person. Aaron Brockovich felt like a real person, like, where, Ellen does not feel it. It feels like a caricature of a person. And what that results in is, again, I'm going to take Brian's word, is patronizing. I think I found it really patronizing.
What about the other characters? Do you think there were other characters? Do you think that held true in, I mean, as I said earlier, like, we don't really spend a lot of time with the other characters, or as much time as we do with Streep. But did you feel like that broadness, that patronizing sense, extends to the other characters in the film?
That's a good question. It's hard to say, because they're really, I mean, how many other characters? There's a lot of performers, but how many characters are in this movie? Like, Banderas and Oldman are just there just to, like, chew the scenery and, yuck it up and just be like these larger than life, portrayals that they're clearly just having fun with. And I loved it. I thought it was great.
Yeah.
Like, so Ellen, Meryl Streep's, they went on the boat trip with another couple. And I remember the scene, we played the clip. They went on the boat trip with another couple, and the other couple, the wife died. And you have the guy, there's one moment where they're talking to a journalist. They're trying to sell the story, and Meryl Streep's like, "Oh, it all takes place in Panama," and he's like the hat, and it's just like, who needs to describe Panama that way? Like, you don't, like, this person didn't know what Panama was. Like, it just, like, what's a Panama? Like, it's so goofy that feels, again, it's a caricature. Like, he's just like this simpleton who's like, "Oh, did you know there's a place called Panama?" It's like, yeah, of course people know what fucking Panama is. Like, it's, I don't know, but it just goes to show, makes him not a actual person. And I can't think of really any other actual character. I don't know. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, you've got the China storyline with this English guy who's kind of what they call a white glove for these, closet capitalists in the Chinese Communist Party who are doing a bunch of dirty business on the side. And, like, those, I don't know, that was kind of a three-hander scene, and it felt very much like everybody was kind of a type in that didn't feel like fleshed out. He's a sleazy, arrogant guy who gets his comeuppance, and she's kind of this, dare I say it, this kind of enigmatic Asian character who's very, closed off. And then there's the other performer in that scene, like, hardly even speaks. And then, there's like more warmth and humanity and drama in the African billionaire sketch, but I don't know. I didn't really feel like any of those people were, like, truly inhabited in a way. Like, I think that criticism is reasonably fair, and I think it does extend to most of the cast.
I mean, Jeffrey Wright is one of my favorite actors. Like, I think he's
so great,
brilliant. Just kind of comes and goes. It's one of the least memorable Jeffrey Wright performances I can really remember, and it's unfortunate because he's so great.
Yep.
Yeah. I don't know. I think you hit the nail on the head, Keir. Broad. It's just too broad.
It's broad. So, more than one critic agreed with me that it recalled the films of Adam McKay. He of course did The Big Short and Don't Look Up, which I was thinking somewhat of those films watching this one. And the criticism of McKay is that he's often too heavy-handed. The New York Post, that paragon of film criticism, called it a 96-minute op-ed. I only quote them when it's funny. Lots of people seem to feel the tone was too breezy. Oldman and Banderas were having too much fun as the bad guys. And as we kind of touched on, like, well, I can understand that as a visceral reaction. It just seems like that's the point. Like, guys like that get away with stuff.
Yeah, like, how else do you play them? Like, they're ludicrously rich assholes who made a fortune, helping other rich assholes protect their money, dodge governments, evade the law. Like, I mean, they're not going to be remorseful, and like, not only that, but like the movie needed them. Like, the movie needed them to be what they were. Like, the density of the material, again, like the central lack of a really central compelling performance. Like, you needed that, like, what jolt of life that they bring to the movie. Like, I can't imagine this film without them in it, and the way that they played them as well.
Yeah, absolutely needed that humor, that levity. The movie did have some defenders, including Michael Phillips of the Chicago Tribune, a critic we both like a lot, and he mostly liked it. He wrote, "The movie doesn't entirely cohere, and it has its sledgehammer side, in addition to its muttering quietly about the hypocrisy side, but Soderbergh and Burns remain exceptionally well-matched collaborators. They're after just enough human interest to make us care, and just enough socioeconomic outrage to make us seethe, some of us anyway." So kind of a mixed review, but he generally positive. And Owen Gleiberman of Variety called it, quote, "a fluky contradiction that works," adding, "The Laundromat is Soderbergh at his most playful and also Soderbergh at his most wonkish, and damned in this case if the two don't chime together." Now, one thing we have to talk about, and I don't want to go on at great length about this because I'm not really qualified to go on at great length about this, but this movie was somewhat controversial. And I think that this is something that could have happened in 2019 and not in 2020 or 2021. Meryl Streep does brown face, which was a choice.
Yeah, I was going to joke when you talked about the three-hander with the Asian woman. I was like, well, at least it wasn't Meryl Streep playing her.
Yeah. That could have happened.
I guess the only question I have is why. I was watching again because you don't know it until later in the movie.
They disguise it reasonably well. I didn't get it.
Yeah, you're like, oh, at the end, you're like, oh, that okay. And watching again, I cannot think of a reason why to do that at all. I don't know if you have, I guess I'm not wildly outraged. Like, I don't think it's like the worst thing in the world. I certainly wouldn't like protest the movie on that grounds. I protested over the ending before I protested over that. But like, I'm not particularly like, I don't know. It's bad. It's bad. But it's also so silly that it doesn't really trouble me too much. The problem is that the ultimate problem is I just don't even know why you do it. Like, what you were thinking.
Yeah. For those who haven't seen the movie and aren't likely to, based on our description of it, Streep also plays this character of this kind of low-level secretary in Mossack Fonseca who becomes, after the unfortunate death of someone else in her office, she gets promoted, which basically means she becomes the new CEO on paper of all these shell companies, which is basically just signing your name to a bunch of documents. And at first she plays it as we believe her character is somebody who's kind of befuddled. She plays in pretty amazing prosthetics and disguise and brown face. So she's playing a Latina character, a Panamanian, I guess. And she is playing somebody who's really in over her head, but then seems to be somebody who's maybe a little more sympathetic. And then we start to think, oh, she's the mole who released the papers or something. And during the ending, this all ties into the ending. She removes the makeup and reveals herself as Meryl Streep, and we all go, gasp, what an actor. She had us fooled. And then she, that segues into the Statue of Liberty moment where she's doing direct address to the camera. I think probably if I were, a Latin or Latina person, Latinx, I would be really offended because she's doing a very broad accent. She's, it's just something that people just, I don't think would have even been considered a couple of years later. I just think people just don't do it. I'm not completely sure what the message is, or the reason, as you say, the reason to have her do it, except for just another kind of Hall of Mirrors, Scooby-Doo kind of moment. Yeah,
that's the only thing I can think is just another. It feels like another scam within the scam within the scam. But who cares? I cannot. I thought about this for a bit. I'm like, again, yes, you wouldn't do this now. You shouldn't have done it then. If this movie were like 1943, I'd be like, okay, well,
yeah. I think it's certainly not as outrageous, given that the movie is a satire and it's making political commentary, and it's also not like, obviously there's a real difference between somebody portraying like a different ethnicity, like, and just doing it in all earnestness and dramatically, and like, maybe taking the role from an actor, who could have otherwise done that. They conceive, this is something they conceived dramatically that they thought would be a good twist or reveal in the movie. So it feels like it's kind of a weird thing in its own class. But again, it just felt, I don't know, didn't seem necessary, and it definitely offended some people at the time. And it's another kind of rare tonal misstep.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I can see why people would be offended. Like, don't get me wrong. It just, tonal misstep is a great way to put it. It's something that, like, I just wish they hadn't done. I guess you can, like you said, you can look at it and be like, well, it's so broad and it's so goofy that, like, seeing that it was her, it's like, oh, okay, I guess that makes sense. But like, realistically, I guess the lesson is just do not do that. You're never, thank God this was like a year early. Like, you're never going to dig yourself in that hole, man. Just throw the shovel up and just you're never getting out.
Yeah, well, and actually this is gonna tie a little bit into my big question for you, which we'll get to in a moment.
Corruption is so widespread, and the result is that governments are supported, because the wealthy are extracting value and taking it away. The governments end up being supported by the people who can at least afford to support the government. So now they have all the pressure on them, and then they're looking at the result of what their politicians are doing, and they don't understand what's happening. And so that was part of what we were trying to do, is this is how this extraction takes place. Transparency is the only solution. Sunlight is really what we have to all be demanding. But these are very entrenched people. These are very entrenched ideas. It's going to be a struggle.
All right, Mike, before we go, here's my big question for you that I've been teasing all episode. But get ready. It's a long question. It's longer than my summary of how the film was made.
Ooh,
now,
all right.
I've been thinking about it a lot as we enter the HBO Netflix anything goes phase of Soderbergh's career. I think he's still making terrifically interesting movies, but by opting out of the Hollywood system and more avoiding wide theatrical releases, is he becoming less culturally relevant? We'll never really know if these movies were seen by more people as he hoped they would because of Netflix's secrecy, but it seems to me they definitely got less buzz. I don't believe I had any random conversations with friends about any of the movies that went straight to streaming. Soderbergh's Rebels on the Backlot peers were mostly pretty quiet in 2019, but hell, Quentin Tarantino released a little film called Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, a actually big film, shot on film, about film, that packed a lot of theaters and got people talking. I mean, film fans went nuts for that movie. And let's say they weren't nuts about The Laundromat. Is Soderbergh slipping away?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really good question that really strikes to the heart of the changing media landscape, the changing movie landscape of relevancy, of how to get into theaters. Can you get into theaters? Like, that's something that, Soderbergh has been, battling for a long time. And it's always been his arch nemesis. And he has said, like, yes, you can make a movie. Can you get it seen? And his war has always been like, get the movie seen. So he's attracted to the potential to get the movie seen. Like, hey, we can put it on Netflix. We can put it on, HBO Max eventually. We can do all these things. We can shoot it on an iPhone and get it done faster and, pump it out through, what was it called? Bleecker Street, right?
Yeah.
With a new kind of distribution deal that is more generous to me as the director. Like, he wants to make the movie and he wants to get it seen. It's a very sort of simple equation in a very complicated landscape. Now, is he slipping away? I mean,
and by that I mean sort of like, is he becoming less culturally relevant or less part of the cultural conversation?
Yeah, no, I mean, I in that context, I would say kind of, yes, because you look at like you said, his peers, his good buddy David Fincher, his Quentin Tarantino, Paul Thomas Anderson. Maybe these aren't his peers, all of them per se, but people of his same ilk, the same auteurish type director. And when they release a movie, when they release, Licorice Pizza, or like you said, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, when they release, when Fincher, unfortunately he's got sucked into the Netflix vacuum as well.
He has,
but I feel like even Mank was a little bigger, than anything. It was like, whoa, Fincher. And I think there's a couple things going on here. Is like, one is, yes, scarcity a little bit. These guys come out with a movie every 3-4 years, if not more sometimes.
That makes it an event.
Makes it an event. I mean, that is the biggest thing probably, is how do you make it an event where it's like, this is the new Malick movie, this is the new whatever movie, and it becomes like something that cinephiles are going to flock to and see the 70 millimeter print and the roadshow and whatever the case may be. Soderbergh absolutely does not do that, cannot do that. He just wants to make movies. He'll make it, again, like we've talked about, iPhone, he'll doodle a script on a bar napkin. It doesn't matter. Like,
he writes a novel on Twitter.
Yeah, exactly. Like, he'll do anything. So he's not wired for, I don't want to say the patience that it takes to make an event movie, because I don't think it necessarily means that like Paul Thomas Anderson is more patient than Steven Soderbergh. Maybe he is, but like, he is so invested and maybe even addicted to the process of making movies that like, I don't think he has it. It's just not in his DNA to sit around and really, really like work on a script for a long time, do a lot of pre-prep, do all these things, take time off, maybe shoot some commercials, make some money, whatever. Like, he's not wired for that. So
I think he is a little impatient, actually. I think that's fair. And I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. It's just the way he's wired. I don't think he has the patience to take 3 years to make a movie.
Yeah, you're probably right. I think that is. I think I was trying to be kind, but like saying it's like a bad thing, but I don't think it is. I don't think there's any value attached to that, negative or positive, But so, I mean, yeah, having that patience to make an event is just not in his DNA, at least seemingly it's not, from all outward appearances. And then, if you're not going to do it make it an event where people are going to show up and, come for the 70 millimeter and the blah, 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 all that kind of stuff that goes with like a Tarantino movie or PTA movie or whatever. Like, now you find yourself like, well, the theatrical model doesn't really work then necessarily, like Unsane, it wasn't that big of a deal. Okay, shot an iPhone. Like, that doesn't get people to flock to the cinema. Like, they're not
right.
that interested.
Yeah. iPhone on IMAX.
Right. Exactly. Like, woohoo, can't wait. Like, that's Nolan territory,
Yeah.
So if you don't have those things, like, I think your immediate cultural relevancy does take a hit, but I think the longevity, the long-term cultural relevancy is preserved and will always be preserved. He's the guy that did all these crazy experiments and shot with this camera and made it in this length of time and for how much, and it was that good, and he worked with these actors. Like, you look at Soderbergh's filmography, you take that step back away from the what have you done for me now or what have you done lately that's been a landmark, you know, that we can be like, ooh, yeah, remember Dunkirk? Ooh, boy, ooh, you know, like
Yeah.
you take one Dunkirk for 4 of Soderbergh's movies, you're like, oh, those are really good. I know those movies, you know, like, so it's about the optics, but optics in terms of relevancy, optics are everything. That's all relevancy is how you're perceived, and his perception in the here and now and from probably broader audiences is probably pretty low. Like he's not the Aaron Brockovich guy anymore. I mean, what do you think? I mean,
yeah, no, I think I would suspect that a lot of these late stage Soderbergh movies, people just don't know about. You know, we're film junkies and we are on the prowl for things to watch and looking at interesting directors. And obviously we're doing a podcast about Steven Soderbergh and we are watching every single one of these movies. But I would guess that, you know, your average film fan knows the half dozen biggest Soderbergh films and has no awareness of High Flying Bird and Let Them All Talk and The Laundromat. And, you know, it makes me sad. I mean, this question actually occurred to me as I was screening next week's movie, Let Them All Talk. And I just had this feeling like Soderbergh is hiding his light under a bushel, you know, but was it because he won't chase the audience or the audience won't follow him? Or, you know, is it really truly just because he's fed up with Hollywood and the distribution system? You know, while I wish his films were bigger events, you know, in some ways they aren't event films. I mean, he's just actually making the kind of mid to low budget adult films that once had an audience in the 1970s, maybe again in the 1990s. And I do love that. That's one of the things I love about him. I want to let him weigh in here. I wish I had the audio, but for that interview with filmmaker that I referenced earlier,
I thought you were gonna bring him out. Be like, and I've got it right here.
When that would talk about a reveal, Streep-worthy reveal.
Some Shyamalan stuff going on.
Actually,
there.
It's like that old Woody Allen movie. It was at Manhattan when he says like they're talking about Marshall McLuhan, and he actually just brings Marshall McLuhan.
Yes. Yeah, it's either Manhattan or Annie Hall. Is that Annie Hall?
Annie Hall. I think it's Annie Hall. They're like, yeah. Anyway, film fans will know that scene. So anyway, Soderbergh will weigh in through his words, read by me. Sorry, Mike. I wish I had audio, but this is a fascinating quote that I think really speaks to what we've been talking about. It's difficult for me to imagine a scenario in which I would literally make a movie for a studio, he said. I'm too frustrated by the way that system works, both economically and creatively. That's one of the reasons the Panama Papers project will probably end up at Netflix, because it's right in that zone of movies that the studios are not interested in, mid-level budget movies for grown-ups. And so he told the reporter that he was so convinced that no studio would be interested that he didn't even set up meetings. He goes on to say, we didn't even take it out. We went to Netflix first and they seemed inclined to do it. And when we had a meeting, they said, so we're assuming you're going to want to do some kind of theatrical release or festivals. And he said, and I said, this is Soderbergh talking, I don't care. I don't care if it never shows up in a theater. And I don't care if I ever go to a festival again. You do whatever you need to do to get eyeballs on this thing. If that's the way you want to do it, that's fine. I'm just telling you, I don't care. I have a creative process now that I'm happy with, both in terms of developing projects and then making them and then putting them out. I'm now driven solely by what stories attract me, end quote. Now, I made a joking Woody Allen reference earlier, but now I'm wondering if it's apt in another way. And no, not the gross way. Allen became someone for whom life was just making movies, almost like he didn't know any other way to exist. Soderbergh has much more range and is more dynamic than Woody Allen. But I think they have that in common, that being on set is more important than anything else, including the film's reception. But what kind of bums me out is Soderbergh's assumption that no studio will make mid-level budget movies for grown-ups. I mean, surely he knows more about this than I do, but I can't help but think that if anyone could make one of these adult movies within the studio system, it's Soderbergh. And maybe if someone with his stature fought to do it, maybe they'd get more attention and maybe some of them would break out and maybe it would open the door for a few more to get made. Maybe. And I can tell he doesn't want to fight that fight. And that's totally fair. But I want Hollywood to get better, not for talented directors to disappear on streaming platforms.
And that's a great point. I mean, that's the kind of there's so many things involved in this discussion. And one of it is how ephemeral streaming is, like how things just get lost and buried and forgotten. Some gems. It's not just Soderbergh. There's tons of good stuff that's like on, God, I mean, think about all the TV shows that you're like, I was talking to someone about Sugar the other day, the Apple Plus show. And I'm like, oh man, you watching Sugar? And they're like, I've never heard of that. I'm like, it's Colin Farrell. Like, and that's not the insult to that person, but it just goes to show, like, there's too much. A lot of it's good, a lot of it's great, a lot of it's garbage. But like, there is no telling what gets buried and what gets forgotten and what actually sticks around. And I'll tell you what, and this, the stuff that sticks around, there's not much of it. You need a theatrical release. You need a physical media release. You need all these things to be, relevant and have longevity and have a literal shelf life, because movies are on the shelf, and it does bum me out because like I want Soderbergh to be able to make the movies he wants to make and be culturally relevant as he once was. And I think that I think he was in a like pilot program where people learn the hard way that this doesn't really work. At the time, what he's saying absolutely makes sense. I just want to get eyeballs on this thing. I want people to watch it. I want people to see it. I just don't care. I want to make the thing and I want you to worry about people watching it. And there's nothing wrong with that. And at the time, we know more now than we did then. Would he make another Netflix movie? I'll be honest, I doubt it. It doesn't seem like he's crazy about that, because I think his next two movies from next year are both going to be released theatrically.
So there's hope for the future is what you're telling me.
I do think so. And I do think this is my last thought. I also think that this comes at a time, this being like Soderbergh right now, 2019, 20, etc. Like he's kind of in a creative like lull-ish. Like he's gone through so many. I mean, you make so many movies, you're going to be peaks and valleys all over the place, But like, you didn't love High Flying Bird. I liked it. I don't think I would like go bananas for it. If it was at the theater, I don't know, I'd rush to see it. I probably would, because it's Soderbergh, potentially. But this is okay. Let them all talk. We'll talk on next episode. But wasn't a movie that like people are talking about, for lack of a better term. So like he's in a little bit of a lull in terms. I mean, it's going to pick back. I think, we'll talk about No Sudden Move, but I think that movie's terrific. And I think people like that a lot more. And it kind of reminded people of Soderbergh. But like, it doesn't help that like he's involved in a the failed streaming experiment, and that he's not making his best stuff either.
Agreed. Well, let's leave it there for now. We'll be picking up more of this conversation next week as we talk about Let Them All Talk. So let's wrap it for this episode of the Filmographers podcast. We say this every time, but listeners, if you haven't taken action yet, please do it now. Take a moment to give us a 5-star rating or a thoughtful comment, or a 4-star rating would be fine with us too. Let us know what you thought of The Laundromat. Or even Adam McKay movies, if you want.
Oh, God. Spoiler, season 2 of Filmographers will not be about Adam McKay movies.
If you don't want to write your own review of the show, but you do want to leave us a review, you will find some to choose from in our show notes. If you have feedback or suggestions, you can also just email them to us at thefilmographerspodcast@gmail.com. I said that kind of funny, so I'll say it again, thefilmographerspodcast@gmail.com.
And thanks as always to Kevin Lau, our just esteemed, wonderful, patient, hardworking producer. Thanks to Gompson, who composed and played our theme music. And thank you to Cosmo Graff, who designed our logo.
Join us next week on the Filmographers podcast when we will discuss Soderbergh's next film, for which Meryl Streep returns and Soderbergh returns to HBO.
Maybe we should call this podcast As Seen on TV.